Welcome, everyone, to the next SDEC session. Thank you all so much for joining. And we are going to be recording this session. So we always get asked that question, but this will be recorded and posted in the SDEC Slack group afterwards. So I'm going to just go through a couple housekeeping items, and then I will hand it off to Julius. So Julius, if you want to click ahead. For those of you who are new to the SDEC, or if someone forwarded you this invite and you're not officially a member of the SDEC, we are a free educational community run by Search Discovery to help educate folks in digital analytics. We cover about 12 topics. You can see the topic categories here. If you want to join the SDEC, which I would highly recommend, so you get notified about these events ahead of time, and so you can be invited to the Slack group and see past webinars and recordings, you can email me at sdec@searchdiscovery.com. And I'm going to be posting that in the chat. And I'm also going to be posting the sign up link in the chat in a little bit so that if you're not officially a member, you can join. Okay, next slide. Oh, Julius, can you push? There we go. One thing I wanted to let everyone know, for some reason, we only have about 67% of the SDEC members who are receiving invites in the Slack group. The Slack group is really important because that's the place where you can actually see all of the recordings that happen if you ever miss an event. So I'd highly recommend that you join the Slack group. I'm not sure why folks aren't in there. It's free, doesn't cost anything, and takes about 2 minutes to join. We also use a Slack group to alert you about webinars right before they're about to start. And we even have local groups by different regions if you want to connect with some of your local peers. So if you are in this, but you're not in the Slack group, again, email me at sdec@searchdiscovery.com and we will get you into the Slack group. And finally, if you have questions for Julius during this session, please put them in the Q&A area of Zoom. Don't put them in the chat. That makes it a little harder. But there is a Q&A button that you can click in the bottom of your Zoom control area, and Julius will get to as many of those questions as we can. So with that, that's all I'm going to say, and I will hand it off to Julius. Thank you so much for joining us, Julius, and we'll talk in a little bit.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for joining everyone my Google Tag Manager Data Layer 101 session. So in this case, this means that I'm going to talk about the beginner stuff about Data Layer. And yeah, so let me just quickly introduce myself, and then we'll dive straight into the content because we have lots to cover. So I am a founder of Analytics Mania, which is a blog where I mainly post about Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics, but mostly Google Tag Manager. So if you have any questions, most likely you will find some answers right here. Also, I have very recently launched a YouTube channel where I talk about very same topics. And then several years ago, I also have published launched the Google Tag Manager community on Facebook, which is still going strong and is growing. And according to my calculations, it should be probably the largest Google Tag Manager only community in the world. So yeah, that's about it for my introduction. And now let's dive into the actual topic. So if you want to learn the most out of this presentation, you must already have some general understanding of Google Tag Manager. So you already must know how to track basic things like, clicks, maybe scroll events or something like that. So you must have at least some kind of working knowledge right here. If you have let's say if you need a refresher, so here it is. By now, you should know that Google Tag Manager works as a middleman between the website and your analytics or marketing tools. So when you install Google Tag Manager, then you can configure, let's see, certain tags, and then they send the data about the user, about the page to Google Analytics, Google Ads, Facebook Pixel, or some other tools. But in reality, what happens is that when you install Google Tag Manager, data layer is also generated on a page. Now, data layer is not some standard part of the website. It is more related to tag management itself. So if you, for example, ask a developer to do something with the data layer, there is a high chance that a developer will have absolutely no clue what are you talking about, because data layer is not some standard part of website development. It's more of a standard part of Google Tag Manager. So when Google Tag Manager is loaded on a page, and then the data layer is generated. And data layer, think of data layer as a bucket, like an empty bucket where you can store certain data temporarily. And then Google Tag Manager, based on your configuration, will take that information from that bucket and then we'll send it further to other tools. And that information can be sent from various parts, or let's say both from people, but also from the code. So in this case, I am actually, I will very quickly, very shortly will explain where that data can come from. Then you can configure Google Tag Manager, and actually you should configure Google Tag Manager to take that data from the data layer and then send it further to tools like Google Analytics or Google Ads. Now, speaking of, let's say, visual explanation of what is the relationship between the website, the data layer, and Google Tag Manager, I always like to use this analogy of Avengers. So basically, this is a website, then we have a data layer, and then we have a Google Tag Manager. So when we want to have some data in the data layer, that data usually comes from the website. So website gives some information to the data layer. I mean, there must be some code on the website that pushes the data to the data layer, but I mean, this is where the data layer gets the data. And then Google Tag Manager takes that information from the data layer. So if you want to use some custom information, some custom data, that data first must appear in data layer. There are some, there are some exceptions, but let's not focus on them right now. So now think that all the custom information that you want to use in Google Tag Manager about the interaction, about the user, about the product or whatever, that must be first pushed to the data layer. And by default, when data layer is created, on that very same moment when it is generated, it is empty. Now something or someone must push that information to the data layer. And the way how the data can be pushed is by using the method data layer push. This is the only way how data can be added to the data layer. This means that there must be a name, and this is the data layer name, and then dot push, and then some information that you want to have in your data layer. Now, usually this is the code that your developers should be using if you want to get some custom data from them to the data layer. For example, if a visitor makes a purchase, then you want to ask your developers to add some data to the data layer. So for example, this is the event, like this is the parameter name, and this is the value of that parameter. So in this case, we see what kind of event was it. And in this case, the value of the event might be whatever you want. It might be purchase, transaction, order, or something else. And then it also makes sense to get some additional data about that purchase, like what kind of purchase was that? How valuable was it? Therefore, we also can ask a developer to push information to the data layer, and I'm talking about transaction ID and transaction total. Now, the names of these parameters depend on what kind of tools are you integrating. For example, if you are integrating Google Analytics, there might be some strict requirements and like strict naming conventions and format requirements. I mean, the requirements for data structure and format that you should also check in their documentation. So in this case, once with this data layer push, we would have in a data layer 3 data points: event name, what was the transaction ID, and then transaction total. And then with Google Tag Manager, we could later use that data in our setup and then send that data, let's say, to Google Analytics or Facebook Pixel. Now you might be wondering, like, okay, so who or what can add that data to the data layer? And actually, there are several options, several scenarios, and I think that you should be at least, I think that you should be aware of them. Be aware of all of them and then decide which one to choose, because the choice depends on how your website or your e-commerce platform is developed. And let me explain that. So we have a website, we have a data layer, and then we have Google Tag Manager. So how can that data from the website be pushed to the data layer? One obvious answer is developer. So if you want to have some custom data about, let's say, a user who has logged in, or the purchase or the product that were purchased, or I don't know, something else, then you could ask a developer to use the data layer push method and to add some data about that particular interaction or that item or whatever. Then another option is, if you're using, and actually it is very valuable if you are working with some popular e-commerce or website building platform, for example, Shopify or Magento or something else. Maybe your website or your e-commerce platform, maybe it supports some plugins. Like, let's say, for example, in this case, we have WordPress, and in WordPress, there's a plugin called Google Tag Manager for WordPress. So when you install this plugin, or let's say when your developer installs this plugin, then you can get some additional data about the product, about the user who has logged in, and all the other useful stuff. So in this case, if you are using a popular platform, you could definitely try to keep looking for a certain plugin and then ask your developers to install that one. Because once you install the plugin, it will save a lot of the development time and you will get your custom data much faster. While, for example, if you're working on some custom platform that was built in-house, then most likely you won't have any plugin available in the market. Therefore, you will need to cooperate more closer with your developers. So these are two options that are related to, basically some custom information that is usually more non-standard. But also there are other options how you can catch certain interaction or catch some data on the website. And that is possible with things called auto event listeners. Now, auto event listeners are basically, let's say, simply put, these are like little functions or let's say collections of functions that are designed to track or certain interactions or let's say certain things that happen on a page. For example, one of the examples could be a link click. So Google Tag Manager has a built-in functionality, a built-in listener that you can enable, and that listener will be looking for link clicks. And then anytime the link click appears, that link clicks information will appear in the data layer. Another example might be, you could implement some custom auto event listener. For example, if you have some generic no-name video player, you can add some custom code to Google Tag Manager, and that listener will be looking for interactions such as play button clicks, the progress. Let's say if someone watches 25% of a video, that information could be pushed by the custom listener to the data layer. So in this case, listener is looking for some interactions. And each listener is programmed and developed to keep looking for a certain type of interaction. And once that listener notices that interaction, it tries to catch all the information related to that particular interaction, like, click URL, click ID, click text, or whatever. And then that information is added to the data layer. And finally, once the data is in the data layer, then you can configure Google Tag Manager, and actually you should configure Google Tag Manager to pick that data from the data layer. So actually, let's take a look. Let's take a look at how this works in action. And in this presentation, I want to focus on two examples. So one is a built-in, a standard auto event listener. So we will try to track a link click. And then we will also take a look at situation that cannot be handled by the built-in functionality in Google Tag Manager. But let's pretend that I asked a developer to add some additional data to the data layer, that I need to set up my configuration. So let me just quickly switch right here. And yeah, so right now I have a Google Tag Manager. I have enabled the preview mode, and this is let's say some test website. So when the Google Tag Manager loads on the page and I enable the preview and debug mode, everything on the left side is actually what is happening in the data layer. So right now, if I refresh the page right here, you will see a new page view, and then you will see 3 events right here. So these are actually 3 data layer pushes that happened on a page, and they are all related to page load. So these are 3 stages of page loading process. Now, if I wanted to see something about some interaction, for example, a link click, here's what I could do. I should try to click one link, another link, and then check what is happening in the preview and debug mode. Now, the reason why I am seeing some information is because I have at least one link click trigger enabled in my container. Therefore, the auto event listener is enabled right here. I mean, it is enabled in Google Tag Manager, and it is looking for the clicks, for any link clicks on a page. And actually, if I click on the link click right here and go to the data layer tab of the preview and debug mode, I can see, well, actually, I can even expand this one, and I can see what kind of information did that listener push to the data layer. And we can see things like, what was the link? What was the URL of that clicked link? What was, let's say, element classes and so on. So this information is pushed into the data layer, and I was able to do that because I have at least one link click trigger enabled on a page, I think. Let me just quickly check that. Actually, I just forgot to refresh the preview mode, but if I do it like that, basically, once I have at least one link click trigger enabled on a page, then link clicks start appearing right here. So if we want to enable a standard, a built-in auto event listener, all we had to do is, all I have to do is to enable the link click trigger right here. So this will enable link click listener. If I wanted to enable scroll tracking, then I would need to go to another trigger and choose, let's say, scroll depth trigger. In this case, I would enable scroll depth listener on my website, and then we would start seeing some scroll events right here. So each of these are data layer pushes that push some information about the interaction that happens on a page. Now, if let's say that I want to, oh, actually, I accidentally clicked that. Now, let's say that I want to go to the login page, and I want to track when a user logs in right here. The user enters username, enters password, and then I click login. Now, with Google Tag Manager, there is no such thing as login tracking. I mean, there's no such a built-in functionality, because if I go to triggers, new, and then I go to trigger configuration, you will not see anything related to login. So this means that if I want to track some custom information, I need to ask a developer, or I need to find some plugin that might do that. But in this case, let's pretend that I'm working on a custom platform and there is no plugin available. So what I could do is that I could ask a developer to push the data to the data layer. And let's say that I want to get 2 data points. One is the name of the event, which is login, and the other one is the ID of the user who has logged in. So now let's pretend that I have sent an email to a developer. Developer has implemented that. And then he came back to me and said, hey, well, I have implemented. Let's check. I mean, can you check whether I did the job correctly? So let's do something. Let's log in right here and see what is happening. Oh, actually, I need to reconnect to the preview mode and then re-log in once again. Yeah, so here it is. So now I am logged in right here. Of course, this is a test dummy website, so there is nothing much to do here. But as I've said before, I have asked a developer to push the data about the login to the data layer. So I go to the tag assistant. This is the preview mode of Google Tag Manager, and this is the latest page view on the login page. And if I take a look right here, I see that there are 3 page view events. I mean, like page view related events. So container loaded, DOM ready, and window loaded, but also I have the login right here. So this was done by some developers. I mean, by my developers, some custom code. So I click on login, and if I expand right here, I see that here is the data layer push, and there were 2 data points pushed to the data layer. Event, which is login, because this allows me to to distinguish what kind of event happened. And then I also have the ID of the user who has logged in. So this is my ID as a user. So now this is another example how you can get data into the data layer. Of course, I mean, if you're using some popular platform like WooCommerce, WordPress, or something else, or Magento, let's say, you could Google and ask, try to find out whether they have, some Google Tag Manager plugins that you could install on a website. So now we have data in the data layer. The question might be, okay, now what? Like, we have data, but like, what's up with that? I mean, what can we do with it? Because if the data is in the data layer, it still does not mean anything. You need to take that data and use that. Therefore, we need to learn how to read the data from the data layer. And there are several options. So for example, if we talk about link click tracking, since I had enabled the link click trigger in my container, and that activated the link click listener, which was sending link click information to the data layer. With each link click, we saw this data layer push, which had some information like, element classes, element URL, for example. This might be definitely useful because I want to know what kind of link was clicked, like which links are the most, most popular among my users. So in this case, I would actually want to send this kind of information to the data layer. I mean, to Google Analytics or Google Ads. Well, usually let's say Google Analytics or Facebook Pixel. So what can I do is that I can access that information with built-in variables. Well, you might be wondering, well, why on earth should I create variables? Let me take a look. Well, actually, let me show you. Now, right now, if I click on link click, and I haven't enabled any click variables in Google Tag Manager, if we go to variables, you won't see any variables right here related to click. Now, I cannot use data in Google Tag Manager unless I have created variables for each data point that I want to use. So in this case, if I want to use data in the data layer that is related to, let's say, clicks, so in this case, element classes, element ID, element URL, I need to create variables. Since I am working right now with some built-in functionality in Google Tag Manager, which is built-in link click trigger, it is enough for me to go to Google Tag Manager to built-in variables and enable all the related variables. If I wanted to work with scroll data, then I would need to enable scroll variables right here. And of course, I would need to create a scroll trigger. Once I create those variables, once I enable those click variables, they will be available in the preview mode right here. So I would need to refresh the preview mode. And then if I do the click once again, and I click on link click in the preview mode, I will see those variables and I will see their values. Now I can use these variables and I can use them in tags, triggers, or I can actually use them even in other variables. So here's an example. For example, this is the Google Analytics tag, and I want to send the event every time a visitor clicks a menu link. So in this case, this is the event category, event action, and in the event label field, I insert the variable. This is a variable because it is surrounded by double curly braces. So in this case, when this particular tag fires, it will send the value of the label, not as this text, but actually as the value of this variable, which is this output. And also I can use that variable in the tag, in the trigger, for example, because I don't want to try to fire my tags on all link clicks. I just want to click on fire on some link clicks. And in this case, if I want to fire on menu link clicks, then this might be one of the conditions. But of course, this depends on what kind of website, this depends on how your particular website is coded by developers. Now, if you want to get some custom data, so for example, we have here the login event and we have user ID. So if I want to use the user ID as a variable in my tags or triggers, or let's say, I don't know, somewhere else, then I can access this information with data layer variables. So this is not a standard. This is a user-defined variable, and that variable can be created by going to Google Tag Manager's interface. Let me just quickly switch. If I go to variables, then in user-defined variable section, I click new, variable configuration, and then data layer variable. So right here, I need to enter the name of the key that is in the data layer. So if I want to access the value of user ID in the data layer, I need to enter user ID. And this is case sensitive. So uppercase I will work. If I enter user ID all lowercase, this will not work because JavaScript is case sensitive and Google Tag Manager is built on JavaScript. I mean, it depends on JavaScript. So if you had, let's say, 5 data points in the data layer, and they are all different, let's say user ID, user pricing plan, or something else, you would need to create a data layer variable for each variable. So 5 data points, 5 data layer variables. And once you create that variable, then you refresh the preview mode and then log into the website once again. Once you click in the preview mode, the login event, and go to variables, you will see that variable and you will see the value, because this is the value that is stored in the data layer. And here's one of the examples where can that variable be used. Of course, this is not the best practice, but this is just like an example. So I just want to show you like how can you set the user ID on the page view tag level in Google Analytics. So in this case, once again, the variable is surrounded by double curly braces. So this means that we are not just setting some text, which is DLV dash user ID, but this is the variable. And when this tag is initiated, it will take the value of this variable that currently is held. Like, I mean, it will check the value of that particular variable at that particular moment, and then it will use its value and insert it in this field. So when this page view fires, then together with that page view, we will be sending user ID to Google Analytics. Now, what if you want to fire a tag not on container loaded or DOM ready or window loaded event, but you want to fire your tag exactly on the login event? Well, you would need to do, well, I mean, in this case, you would need to create a custom event trigger, because you need to instruct the Google Tag Manager that, hey, I want to fire my tag, let's say Google Analytics event tag for the login. So I want to fire that tag exactly when the login event is pushed to the data layer. So you need to create custom event trigger, and that custom event trigger, I mean, the reason why we enter login right here is because the event parameters value right here is login. And also you see the same name right here. So you need to enter the name of the event right here. And with this trigger, you instruct Google Tag Manager that, hey, when a data layer push occurs where event equals to login, then activate this trigger, and all the tags that are connected to this trigger, they will be fired. And this, I mean, and you need to create a separate trigger for each custom event that you want to track. I mean, for each custom data layer push. There are some options how to create, let's say, a single custom event trigger for several events. I mean, for several types of events like login, registration, maybe purchase or something else. But let's keep that for intermediate users. And in this case, you just can focus that if you want to track all login events, you need to create one trigger for login. Then if you want to track all registration events, you need to create another trigger, because maybe registration events, data layer push contains event, colon, and then registration or something like that. And here's an example. Well, I mean, this is just a snippet of the screenshot, but here is this is a bottom of the Google Analytics tag in Google Tag Manager, and this tag will fire when the custom event trigger login is activated. And this will be activated when our login, when a data layer push contains an event parameter with the name login right here. So I have also some other examples, because you might be wondering like, okay, so what kind of other useful data could I ask my developer to add to the data layer? And well, this is quite a common question that I get from my students, from my readers, but also see other people talk online. So the answer, I mean, I quite hate this answer, but it's the truth and it's the reality. So what kind of data is useful to have in the data layer? Well, it depends. It depends on what do you need, like what are your plans, what do you wish to track, and what is possible, let's say in the database or something like that. So for example, if you want to, first you need to answer like to yourself, like answer the question, what do you want to measure or to track? For example, if you want to track when users log in, here are some of the ideas that you could track. For example, the name of the event. And this is just an example. You might name, you are free to use a different name for your event. For example, you might just choose the login or user underscore login or something like that. So this is totally up to you. Then user ID. that is definitely useful. Of course, don't forget things like GDPR and consent, of course. If your login supports multiple login methods like Google login, Facebook login, email login, maybe it might make sense to you for you to track, how are your users logging in. But if you should basically ask yourself, like, does login method tracking make sense to you? If not, then don't track it. Then, for example, another example could be purchase. So if you have an e-commerce website, or let's say, I don't know, some simple website where visitors can make a purchase, then what kind of information do you want or need to track I mean, maybe your tools, your marketing tools or analytics tools, maybe they require certain parameters by default. So here's an example. Transaction ID, definitely useful. I mean, the majority of tools require transaction IDs because, for the duplication purposes, or I don't know, just to see the list of all transactions and then be able to for you to be able to debug or troubleshoot why certain transactions are missing and so on. Then transaction total might be useful, shipping costs, taxes, products, coupons. Well, speaking of the naming convention of these parameters, these depend on what kind of tools are you using. For example, if you want to implement the enhanced e-commerce of Google Analytics, which is quite difficult to implement, so then you should follow the naming convention that is explained in the Google Analytics official documentation. I mean, Google Tag Manager official documentation. Now, if you are implementing data and sending it to some other tool, maybe the structure will be a little different. So this is up to you, and of course, up to your tools that you are using. So if you want to learn more, and if you feel confused about what I have said right now, because this is actually how it's supposed to be, because Google Tag Manager data layer is one of the most complex topics, especially for beginners to understand. So you need to, you don't have to, basically you should not give up. You should continue learning and digging deeper. So if you want to, find more about the data layer ideas, or, you just need more clarification, or if you want to learn more about best practices working with data layer, I have a free cheat sheet. So you can use this link, follow this link, and get the cheat sheet. It's like, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 pages, like quite short, dense, but in this case, definitely will give you some additional action items related to the data layer. So yeah, thank you for coming to the session. And if you have other questions, feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'm also available on LinkedIn, and obviously you will find me on my website, which is analyticsmania.com. So thank you once again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julius. So we already have a lot of questions coming in, but for all of you on the call, now is a great time to post your questions to the Q&A. Please put it there instead of the chat, and we will start working through the questions. And if you have a phone and you want to take a little quick snapshot of the QR code there, that will take you right to Julius's Analytics Mania Learn Data Layer. So let's dive in, Julius. Can you show us how to create the recipe so that we can save a GTM setup and apply the same tracking to a new site or container?
Yeah, sure. So let's do this very quickly. So I will not show you how to create tags and triggers and variables because every setup is different. So you need to figure out what kind of setup is mostly used across your multiple projects. So once you create your tags, your most popular tags, triggers, and variables, then go to admin, go to export container, and then default workspace, and then select all the items that you want to export. When you click export, that is done. I mean, you will get the JSON file. This is the file that I have downloaded, and the next time that you want to import that recipe to your container, you just go to, once again, to some of your containers. Let's say to a newly created container. Go to admin, then import, and then you will need to select that file and choose like the workspace and how do you want to resolve your conflicts if you have some items that are already existing in the container. But basically, like right now, you should basically decide what kind of things are you going to use in your container the most. By the way, also you can just Google in like I have more on my website. I have like more like 40 recipes, so you can just Google like Magic recipes and use one of them because they cover a lot of standard setups.
Okay, next question. Any advice in migrating to Google Analytics 4? Anything to watch for migrating existing custom dimensions created at the data layer and pushing to existing universal Google Analytics?
I'm actually still hesitating on Google Analytics 4. I mean, I know that it is out of beta, but they are still releasing new features. So I think that I will wait maybe for a month or so, even more, and then I will dive into the migration. So right now I don't have any tips like how to migrate from Universal Analytics to GA4. I know that there are some like tools, not tools, but Google has developed its own like solutions. But I know that the migration will not be like 100% flawless. So you will still need to recreate some things, but I don't have like precise tips right now.
Okay, the next question delves a little bit into the Adobe world. So if you need to punt, no worries. But does the data layer events requested to the developer also work with Adobe Launch and Adobe Analytics? One of our clients wants to put Adobe Analytics on our website where we have natively deployed a GA data layer.
I wish Jim Gordon was here because he would know. Basically, as far as I know, but I have absolutely no experience with Adobe's ecosystem. But from what I've heard, is I think that Adobe's data layer is totally different because Google Tag Manager's data layer is event driven, and I think that Adobe's data layer is something else. Not sure,
Yeah,
but
no,
like
it is event driven. So I can answer that for you. So you can use the same data layer with Adobe Launch that you use with GTM. So there's just some kind of updates you have to make. There's actually a launch extension that you would have to use that our company Search Discovery made called Data Layer Manager, which is one of the most popular extensions. But whoever asked that question, if you want to email me at sdec@searchdiscovery.com, I'm more than happy to kind of walk you through that.
Just one more question about that. So maybe the previous some older tag manager in of Adobe, maybe that one was
Yeah,
not event driven.
DTM. Yeah,
Yeah,
DTM was
DTM.
not event
Okay,
driven, but Launch is.
gotcha. So I
And
was
Launch isn't
familiar.
really event driven, but the extension that we've made at Search Discovery makes it event driven, if that makes
Okay,
sense.
cool.
Okay, next question. Can you create multiple labels per event?
I am not sure I understand the question in this case. So if you could ask the question once again, but like with more details, I would be able to answer that.
Yeah, so I'll come back. So Ilan, if you want to kind of put another question in, we'll come back to that one. How do you create the data layer via GTM instead of developer? So I'm not sure if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, makes sense totally. So when you install Google Tag Manager, by default, data layer is already created. So let me just quickly show you. So if I just let's say refresh the page, I hope that this will be quickly. So if I refresh the page and I go to the console, well, this is a bit of a technical zone, but here it is. So the data layer is already here. I mean, I haven't configured, well, actually, if I go to the homepage, I definitely know that there is no login information right there. So if I go to the data layer is already there and it already has some information. So the Google Tag Manager by default creates data layer. So if you don't need any custom data, you don't have to create data layer. Data layer is already there because Google Tag Manager's container code that you have to add to the website, it already checks if the data layer is there. And if the page doesn't have data layer yet, then it creates one and then starts putting data into that data layer bucket automatically. Now, if you want to add some custom data, like, I don't know, some custom data, you can use things like data layer push in custom HTML tags. But for like to get some use out of it, you need to know how to code in JavaScript, at least in most cases. So I could just, I could just basically go like this. So script, and I can just do data layer push and then push some information. Let's say event I don't know, testing or whatever. And then this data layer push will, when this tag fires, it will push additional data to the data layer. But when it comes to thinking about what kind of data can you get in the data layer, in the beginner level, don't think about adding something custom by yourself, because there are still many things that you need to learn. And like, this is one of those, further down the line items that you should learn. So in this case, focus on things like standard functionality in Google Tag Manager. So let's say all the triggers that are right here. And then speaking of custom solutions, like custom functionality, some of them can be found in the GTM recipes. So I entered in search GTM recipes, and I have collected a bunch of recipes. These basically are like container templates that you can import, and then they will start tracking certain things. So these recipes, some of them include some custom code, custom listeners that will be looking for interactions on a page, and those listeners will add custom data to the data layer. So feel free to discover this one. I mean, to browse through it. So I mean, some of these were written, for example, by Bounteous, by Simo Hava, and some and all the other stuff. So I mean, I've just browsed the entire web for you and collected, in my opinion, the most useful recipes that you can use in your setup. So probably.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions. We're going to try to do a power round here.
Okay, sure.
Do you have a favorite tool or tools or browser extensions to see what is sent to the data layer?
The most useful is the preview mode itself. Then another one is AdSwerve's data layer inspector. So I inspect that one, and then I mean enable that one, and then in the preview mode, I mean in the console of the browser, I can see what was pushed to the data layer. So my favorite is the AdSwerve, but the preview and debug mode is also a solid one.
How many data layer objects can be created? Is there a limit?
There's a limit, but it doesn't make, I mean, it makes no impact. So there can be up to 300 data layer pushes, but then if you exceed that limit, then the newest data layer push will remove the oldest one. But it doesn't, as I mentioned, it doesn't make any sense, because you still, in Google Tag Manager, you can always access only the latest value. So it doesn't matter, like, if it's like 20 pushes ago or 300 pushes ago, you can access only the latest one. So yeah.
If I don't use a data layer, will I still be able to get data into Google Analytics?
Sure, you can cooperate with developers. Well, I mean, that depends. I mean, if you activate Google Analytics tag, code on your website, it tracks some things by default, like page URL, page title, let's see, browser, like screen size, and all the other stuff. So this data is collected by default. Now, if you want to get some custom data into the data layer, into Google Analytics, like custom dimensions, that this depends on how have you installed Google Analytics before. So if that is, if you have installed with Google Tag Manager, then most likely you will need data in the data layer first. If a developer has implemented Google Analytics directly in the source code, then your developers will need to handle that custom parameter like transfers.
Okay, we got time for one more question. Some people had some questions around if the phrase data layer is not named exactly data layer, is that an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So data layer, the name data layer is case sensitive. So if the data layer is, let me just quickly zoom in. So if the only data layer naming that will work is like this one with the uppercase L. If the data layer, so this data layer push will work just fine. But if the developer names like that with all lowercase, that will not work. Data layer will not work. Although this looks like it would work, but in reality, it would not work. Then data layer with spaced absolutely would not work. So this is very much a strict name, and it must be like that. Of course, there are some technical solutions how to rename the data layer and let's say use some other name like data layer 1 or custom data layer or whatever, but this is more advanced, and you should now focus that data layer is written exactly like that, and this is case sensitive.
Okay, awesome. Will you throw your contact information slide back up? So we are at our
Sure.
time. So if I'm going to give you the list of the questions that we didn't get to, and if you want, you're more than happy to answer them, and I can put that into our
Absolutely.
Slack group. But if not, other people can also email you directly and ask you any questions, hopefully. So awesome. So thank you all for joining, and Julius, thank you so much for sharing your great content and taking so many questions. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.